The salt water burns my throat as I scream Dylan's name one last time, watching the white yacht carrying my fiancé and my supposed best friend Sophia grow smaller against the orange sky. And I finally understand that this was never about love. This was about revenge, about destroying the Chen family fortune that my grandfather built from nothing. And as the waves pull me under for the third time, I can taste my own blood mixing with the ocean, and I think about how stupid I was to trust them, how I gave Dylan access to our company accounts, how I signed over my inheritance rights just last week because he said it proved I loved him more than money, and now I'm going to die here alone while they sail back to shore to comfort my grieving parents and take control of everything my family worked for. My evening gown, the one Dylan bought me for this special dinner cruise, weighs me down like concrete chains. The designer silk that cost more than most people's cars now dragging me toward the ocean floor 20 miles off Catalina Island, and I can't believe I was so blind. So desperately in love that I ignored every warning sign, every red flag, every moment when my family tried to tell me that Dylan Park was not what he seemed, that his charming smile and passionate declarations of love were just tools to get close enough to destroy us from the inside. I remember now, as the water fills my lungs, how it all started 2 years ago when Dylan approached me at that coffee shop near USC. How he seemed so different from the other men who only wanted the Chen family connections, how he insisted on paying for our modest coffee dates even though I knew he was struggling financially, how he made me feel like I was worth loving for myself and not just my trust fund. And God, I was such a fool, such a naive little rich girl who thought love conquered all, who believed that giving him access to my world would prove that I wasn't like other spoiled heiresses who looked down on people like him. But now I can see the truth in perfect clarity as the ocean steals my breath. How Dylan's family restaurant chain went bankrupt 20 years ago and he blamed my grandfather's shipping company for undercutting their seafood supply contracts. How he spent years planning this revenge, researching our family, learning our weaknesses, finding the perfect way to infiltrate and destroy everything we built. And Sophia, sweet Sophia, who became my best friend in college, who held my hair when I was sick, who helped me pick out my engagement dress, she was in on it from the beginning, documenting every private moment, every vulnerable confession, building a case for my supposed mental instability that would make my death look like suicide. The irony hits me even as I'm drowning that I'm an excellent swimmer, captain of my high school team, spent every summer at the beach, but they drugged my champagne during dinner, something that made my limbs heavy and my thoughts foggy, and when Dylan suggested we go swimming off the yacht's stern platform, when Sophia laughed and said it would be romantic, when they both went back inside while I was floating under the stars, I thought they were giving us privacy, not abandoning me to die in the Pacific Ocean while they established their alibi. I think about my parents, how devastated they'll be when Dylan and Sophia return to shore with tears in their eyes and a story about how I insisted on swimming alone despite their protests, how I seemed depressed lately, how they tried to stop me but I was determined to go in the water, and my poor father will blame himself for not stopping the engagement, my mother will cry herself to sleep for months, and my grandfather, my dear grandfather who built Chen Maritime Holdings from a single fishing boat into the most successful shipping empire on the West Coast, he'll die of grief knowing that his granddaughter's foolishness destroyed everything he worked for. The worst part is that Marcus tried to warn me, Marcus Rivera, who's been the lifeguard at our family's private beach since we were kids, who always appeared whenever I needed help but never asked for anything in return, who looked genuinely worried every time Dylan and Sophia accidentally left me stranded somewhere. And I dismissed his concerns as jealousy, told him he didn't understand what real love looked like, said he was just the beach help, and couldn't possibly comprehend the complexities of my relationship with someone like Dylan, who came from nothing and was building something beautiful with me. Marcus, who pulled me out of riptides when I was 12 and taught me to read the currents, who drove me home at 2 a.m. when Dylan and Sophia abandoned me at that Newport Beach party 6 months ago and I was too proud to call my parents, who sat with me in the hospital when they left me on Catalina Island during that day trip and I nearly died of dehydration, who never once said, "I told you so," even though his dark eyes showed how much my choices were hurting him, and now I realize he wasn't just some local lifeguard who worked summers at our beach. There was something more about him. Something I was too blind to see because I was so obsessed with proving that I could love someone who wasn't from my world. I can see him now through the murky water, Marcus diving toward me with powerful strokes, his lifeguard training taking over even though we're miles from shore, and I want to tell him I'm sorry. Sorry for not listening. Sorry for choosing Dylan over his quiet loyalty. Sorry for not seeing that he was the one who truly cared about me. But it's too late. My vision is going black. My lungs are full of salt water, and all I can think is that this is what I deserve for being so stupid, so blind, so desperate to be loved that I handed my enemies the weapons they needed to destroy everything I held dear. The last thing I see before everything goes dark is Marcus's face above mine, his strong hands reaching for me, and I think about how he's always been there, always ready to save me, but this time even he can't reach me in time. And then the water closes over my head and I think this is how it ends? Not with a fairy tale wedding, but with drowning in designer silk while my murderers sail away into the sunset. And I wish I could go back, wish I could do it all differently, wish I could save my family from the destruction I brought upon them, but then everything goes black and I know it's too late for wishes. But before the darkness takes me completely, my mind floods with memories of how we got here, how Dylan and Sophia systematically destroyed my judgment over 2 years of careful manipulation, and I see it all now with perfect clarity. Every calculated move, every staged coincidence, every moment when they made me choose between them and the people who actually loved me, and I understand that they were practice runs, testing how far they could push me, how much isolation I would accept, how completely they could separate me from my support system before moving to their final phase. It started with that first abandonment at the Newport Beach house party, where Dylan introduced me to his USC friends as his girlfriend, where Sophia insisted we go together for moral support, where they both disappeared around midnight after Dylan had a quiet conversation with some guy I didn't recognize, and I spent 3 hours looking for them, calling their phones, asking everyone if they'd seen my boyfriend and best friend, until finally I gave up and started walking home in my heels and cocktail dress, thinking maybe they'd gotten sick and left without thinking to tell me. That's when Marcus found me, 20 blocks from the party, stumbling along the Pacific Coast Highway at 2 in the morning with mascara running down my face and blisters bleeding through my designer shoes. And he didn't ask questions, just pulled his Jeep over and opened the passenger door, waited while I climbed in, and tried to explain through tears that my boyfriend and best friend had left me, that there must have been some misunderstanding, that they would never abandon me on purpose, and Marcus just nodded and drove me home, walked me to my door, made sure I got inside safely before disappearing back into the night like some kind of guardian angel. The next morning, Dylan called crying, said he'd been sick and Sophia had to drive him home, said he looked everywhere for me but couldn't find me, said he was so sorry and it would never happen again, and I believed him because I wanted to believe him, because the alternative was admitting that the man I loved had left me stranded on purpose. And when Sophia showed up with coffee and croissants and the same tearful apology, when they both held me and promised it was just a terrible misunderstanding, I let myself be convinced because being manipulated felt better than being alone. But then it happened again 3 months later, the Catalina day trip that nearly killed me, where Dylan suggested we take his friend's boat out for snorkeling, where Sophia packed a picnic lunch and brought her underwater camera to document our adventure, where they both encouraged me to swim out to the reef alone while they cleaned up the boat. And when I finally made it back to shore after an hour of swimming, exhausted and salt-burned and starting to panic, the boat was gone, just gone, and I was stranded on a tiny island with no food, no water, no way to call for help. I spent 6 hours in the blazing sun before the Coast Guard found me, 6 hours of dehydration and sunstroke and growing terror, and when they finally pulled me onto their rescue boat, when they told me my boyfriend had reported me missing and was waiting at the marina, I still made excuses for him, still believed his story about engine trouble and radio malfunctions, still thought it was just bad luck and poor communication, not deliberate abandonment, not attempted murder disguised as negligence. Marcus was waiting at the hospital when the Coast Guard brought me in, still in his lifeguard uniform, his face white with worry, and he stayed with me through the IV fluids and electrolyte replacement, through the doctor's lecture about sun exposure and dehydration, through my parents' frantic phone calls and my grandfather's quiet fury. And when Dylan finally showed up with flowers and tears and another elaborate explanation, I saw Marcus's jaw tighten, saw his hands clench into fists, saw him look at Dylan like he wanted to throw him through the window, but he didn't say anything, just squeezed my hand and told me he was glad I was safe before walking out of the room. That night, my grandfather sat on my hospital bed and took my hands in his weathered ones, the hands that built our shipping empire from nothing, and he said, "Isabella, sweetheart, that boy's going to get you killed." And I got angry, told him he didn't understand what love looked like, that Dylan was from a different world and my family's prejudice was showing, that just because he didn't have money didn't mean he didn't care about me, and my grandfather's eyes filled with tears as he said, "It's not about money, little one. It's about character, and a man of character doesn't leave the woman he loves alone in danger." But I was 23 and in love and convinced that I knew better than everyone else. The engagement happened 6 months later, at the annual Children's Hospital charity gala that my family sponsors every year, where Dylan got down on one knee in front of 500 people and presented me with a ring he claimed he'd saved for months to buy. And I said yes because the whole room was watching, because saying no would have humiliated him publicly, because I thought this was what love looked like, grand gestures and public declarations, not the quiet consistency of someone like Marcus who never asked for anything but was always there when I needed him. My parents objected, of course, said Dylan was moving too fast, that I barely knew him, that something felt wrong about the timing, but I was so tired of their disapproval, so sick of feeling like they thought I couldn't make my own decisions, that I moved out of the family house and into a penthouse apartment with Dylan, signing the lease with my trust fund because he said it would prove that I loved him more than my family's money, that I was willing to build something independent together, and like a fool, I believed that sharing my wealth was the same as sharing my life. That's when Dylan started working his way into the family business, charming my father with talk about his business degree and his ideas for expanding into new markets, convincing my mother that he was serious about building a future with me, even winning over some of my grandfather's associates with his knowledge of shipping regulations and port authorities. And I was so proud that my family was finally accepting him, so happy that the two worlds I loved were coming together, that I didn't notice how Dylan was asking very specific questions about our accounts, our contracts, our vulnerabilities. Within 3 months of our engagement, Dylan had a consultant position at Chen Maritime Holdings, with access to financial records and strategic planning meetings, and my grandfather pulled me aside one last time, his 85-year-old hands trembling as he gripped my shoulders, and he said, "Isabella, I've seen this before, during the war. Young men who seemed charming but were actually gathering intelligence for the enemy, and that boy is not what he seems. He's too interested in our business operations, too eager to gain access to information that has nothing to do with loving you." But I was so angry at what I saw as his prejudice, so hurt that he couldn't trust my judgment, that I told him he was paranoid and bitter and that Dylan loved me for who I was, not what I had. 2 weeks later, my grandfather had a minor heart attack, and as he lay in the hospital bed looking frail and defeated, he whispered, "I won't live to see you figure out the truth, sweetheart. But when you do, remember that Marcus Rivera has been protecting you since you were children, and his family's resort empire is worth more than ours, and he's never asked you for a single thing." And I thought he was delirious from the medication, thought he was confusing Marcus with someone else, because Marcus was just a lifeguard, just a local boy who worked summers at our beach, not someone with a resort empire, not someone who could help save our family if Dylan really was the threat my grandfather believed him to be. But my grandfather died in his sleep that night, and at his funeral, as I stood beside his grave in my black dress with Dylan's arm around my waist, I noticed Marcus standing far back in the crowd, wearing an expensive suit I'd never seen before, surrounded by men in business attire who treated him with obvious respect, and for just a moment I wondered who he really was, what I'd missed about him all these years. But then Dylan whispered something sweet in my ear and the moment passed, and I convinced myself that grief was making me see things that weren't there. The final phase of Dylan's plan began after the funeral, when he convinced me that the only way to honor my grandfather's memory was to modernize the company, to make bold moves and strategic changes. And like an idiot, I signed over my inheritance rights, giving Dylan power of attorney over my shares of Chen Maritime Holdings, because he said it proved that I trusted him completely, that I was willing to let him help rebuild what my grandfather had started. And within days, our stock prices began fluctuating wildly, our major contracts started falling through, and our family fortune began disappearing into offshore accounts that Dylan claimed were necessary for international expansion. My parents begged me to reconsider, to revoke Dylan's access to our accounts, to see that our company was being systematically destroyed from within, but I was so deep in his manipulation, so convinced that everyone else was wrong and only Dylan understood how to save us, that I defended every questionable transaction, every mysterious transfer, every decision that moved us closer to bankruptcy. And when my father collapsed from the stress and had to be hospitalized, when my mother started taking anxiety medication just to get through the day, I still believed Dylan's story that they were just resistant to change, just stuck in old ways of thinking, just unable to see his vision for our future. And through it all, Marcus watched from the sidelines, appearing whenever I needed help but never pushing, never demanding, never making me choose between him and the people who were destroying my life. And I was so cruel to him, so dismissive of his quiet concern, telling him that he couldn't possibly understand the complexities of my relationship with Dylan, that he was just the beach help and should stay in his own lane, that I didn't need his protection anymore because I had a fiancé who loved me, and every word was like a knife to his heart. I can see that now, but at the time, I thought I was just being clear about boundaries, just helping him understand that what we had as children was over now that I was building an adult life with someone else. As consciousness fades and the Pacific Ocean fills my lungs, my mind spirals through the horrible clarity of perfect understanding, and I see Dylan and Sophia's plan in its complete, calculated brutality. Every lie they told, every manipulation they used, every moment when they pretended to love me while orchestrating the destruction of everything I held dear. And I finally understand that this was never about romance or passion or building a life together. This was about revenge, cold and methodical and 20 years in the making. Through the murky water, I can hear their voices, distorted by the ocean, but still clear enough to understand. And they're not even trying to hide their triumph anymore, not bothering to maintain the facade of concern or panic. And Sophia is laughing as she tells Dylan, "I can't believe the stupid rich girl made it so easy, signing over her inheritance like that, giving you access to everything, even convincing her family to trust you. God, I thought we'd have to work much harder to get close enough to destroy them." And Dylan's response makes my blood freeze even as it spills into the salt water. 20 years I've been planning this, ever since her grandfather's company destroyed my father's restaurants, ever since my family lost everything because Robert Chen decided our seafood contracts weren't profitable enough for his precious shipping empire, and now I get to watch his granddaughter drown while his company burns to the ground. The truth hits me like a physical blow, and I realize that every moment of our relationship was researched and rehearsed, that Dylan spent months studying me before that first meeting at the coffee shop, learning my routines, my vulnerabilities, my desperate need to be loved for myself rather than my family's money, and he crafted his entire personality around what would appeal to me: the struggling student who insisted on paying for our dates, the ambitious young man who wanted to prove himself worthy of my family's respect, the passionate lover who made me feel like I was the most important thing in his world. All of it fake, all of it designed to make me trust him enough to give him the access he needed to destroy us from within. Sophia's role becomes clear now too, how she positioned herself as my best friend during our sophomore year at USC, how she encouraged my relationship with Dylan from the beginning, how she documented every private conversation and vulnerable moment to build a case for my supposed mental instability. And I remember how she always had her phone out during our girls' trips, how she posted carefully edited photos and videos that made me look erratic and unstable, how she slowly isolated me from my other friends by creating drama and conflicts that always somehow ended with them choosing to distance themselves from me. And I realized that she was building a social media narrative that would support their final plan, creating evidence that I was depressed and suicidal so that my death would look like a tragic but predictable ending to a young woman's mental breakdown. The 3 abandonment incidents were practice runs, I understand now, carefully orchestrated tests to see how long it would take for rescue to arrive, how far they could push before someone intervened, how to make their abandonment look accidental while ensuring I was in real danger. And each time Marcus appeared to save me, they gathered more information about his response time and methods, learning exactly how much distance they needed to ensure that even he couldn't reach me in time. And the final cruise was planned with military precision, taking me 20 miles offshore during the dinner hour when other boats would be returning to harbor, drugging my champagne to slow my reflexes, timing their departure for maximum lethality. Dylan's knowledge of my family's business operations was never about helping us succeed. I see that now. It was about identifying our vulnerabilities and exploiting them systematically, and every suggestion he made, Every strategy he proposed, every change he recommended was designed to weaken our company and make it easier for his investors to acquire our assets at bankruptcy prices. And I think about how proud I was when my father accepted Dylan into our business meetings. How grateful I felt that my family was finally embracing the man I loved, never realizing that I was bringing the enemy inside our gates, giving him access to the intelligence he needed to destroy everything my grandfather built. The offshore accounts, the canceled contracts, the mysterious insurance lapses, the hostile takeover, all of it was coordinated by the same group of investors who had been planning this revenge for 2 decades, waiting for the right opportunity to strike at the Chen family, and Dylan was their perfect weapon. Young and charming and desperate enough to spend years building a fake relationship just to get close enough to strike. And I was their perfect target, naive and lonely and so hungry for love that I would ignore every warning sign, trust every lie, defend every betrayal until it was too late to save anyone. But the worst revelation comes when I hear Sophia mention Marcus, and she says, "I still can't believe that Lifeguard tried to warn her, like some beach bum could understand high-stakes business." Although I have to admit he almost ruined everything when he kept showing up to rescue her, we had to plan this final trip so far offshore that even he couldn't interfere. And Dylan laughs and responds, "Yeah, what was that about anyway? Some local boy thinking he could compete with me for a billionaire's daughter. Although I guess it worked out perfectly because now she'll die thinking nobody could save her, not even her precious beach guardian." They don't know, I realize with a shock that cuts through my drowning consciousness, they don't know who Marcus really is. They never researched him thoroughly enough to discover that he's not just some local lifeguard, but the heir to the Rivera Resort empire, that his family's wealth makes mine look modest, that he's been working as a lifeguard by choice, not necessity, staying close to our family's private beach, not because he needed the job, but because he was protecting me, watching over me, waiting for me to see him clearly. And all these years I dismissed him as just the help while he was actually my equal in every way that mattered. Someone who could have saved my family's company with a single phone call if I had just been smart enough to ask. The irony is devastating, that I spent 2 years chasing a fake love with a man who wanted to destroy me while ignoring the real love of someone who wanted to protect me, that I gave my inheritance to an enemy while rejecting help from an ally, that I defended my destroyer while insulting my savior. And as the ocean claims my life, I understand that Marcus's quiet consistency wasn't the behavior of someone beneath my notice. It was the behavior of someone who loved me enough to be patient, who respected me enough to let me make my own choices, even when those choices broke his heart, who was wealthy enough to save my family but honorable enough to wait for me to ask instead of forcing his help on me. The saddest part is that my grandfather knew. Somehow he figured out that Marcus was more than he seemed, that his family had the resources to help us if I was willing to swallow my pride and accept assistance from someone I had categorized as beneath my social class. And his final words to me were a desperate attempt to open my eyes, to make me see that the man I was dismissing as just the beach help was actually my salvation. But I was so convinced that love meant choosing someone who needed me rather than someone who could take care of me, so determined to prove that I wasn't a spoiled princess who only valued money and status, that I rejected the very help that could have saved us all. Now I'm dying because of my own blindness, my own pride, my own desperate need to be loved by someone who represented everything my family wasn't, and my parents will lose their daughter and their legacy. My grandfather's life work will disappear into Dylan's offshore accounts, and Marcus will blame himself for not trying harder to warn me, not being more forceful in his attempts to protect me, not revealing his true identity sooner, even though I probably would have accused him of lying, of trying to manipulate me the same way Dylan was, because I was that far gone, that convinced that everyone was lying to me except the people who were actually trying to kill me. The water fills my lungs completely now, and my vision goes black, and my last thought before everything ends is that I would give anything for a second chance, anything to go back and make different choices, to listen to my grandfather's warnings and Marcus's concerns, to see Dylan and Sophia for what they really were before they could destroy my family, to save the people I love from the consequences of my foolish heart. But it's too late for wishes, too late for regrets, too late for anything except the darkness that swallows me as completely as the Pacific Ocean. And then I open my eyes and I'm standing in my childhood bedroom looking at my diary from 2 years ago, and I realize I've been given the second chance I thought was impossible. I open my eyes and I'm standing in my childhood bedroom, sunlight streaming through the windows that overlook the private beach where Marcus has worked every summer since we were kids, and I'm holding my diary from 2 years ago, the pink leather journal where I wrote about my hopes for college and my dreams of finding true love, and the date on the page is May 15th, 2 years in the past, the day before I'm supposed to meet Dylan Park at Cafe Luna near USC campus, the day before everything went wrong, and I know with absolute certainty that I've been given a miraculous second chance to save my family and myself from the destruction I caused. My hands are shaking as I set down the diary and look around the room that I moved out of 6 months ago in my previous timeline, but now it's exactly as I left it when I went to college. My high school swim team trophies still gleaming on the shelves, my collection of romance novels still arranged alphabetically on the bookcase, my childhood photos with Marcus still displayed on the bulletin board where I pinned them years ago, back when I thought of him as just a family friend instead of the love of my life that I was too blind to recognize. And I can barely breathe as I realize that none of it has happened yet. Dylan hasn't destroyed my family. My grandfather is still alive downstairs reading his morning paper. My parents are still happy and successful, and I have the knowledge I need to prevent every terrible thing that's coming. I grab my phone with trembling fingers and check the date again, confirming that it's really May 15th, 2 years ago, and then I scroll through my messages and find Dylan's text from last night. Can't wait to see you tomorrow at Cafe Luna. Beautiful. I have something important to ask you, and I know that this is the moment when he plans to start his seduction. The carefully orchestrated meeting where he'll pretend to be a struggling student who's impressed by my kindness and humility, where he'll begin the 2-year manipulation campaign that will end with my murder and my family's destruction, but now I have the power to stop it before it starts. I delete Dylan's text without responding, and then block his number, feeling a surge of satisfaction as his name disappears from my phone. But I know that's not enough. That Dylan and Sophia will find other ways to approach me if I don't handle this strategically, that I need to use my knowledge of their plan to expose them and protect my family without revealing that I somehow know the future. And as I try to figure out my next move, I look out the window and see Marcus walking down the beach path toward the Lifeguard station, the same route he's taken every summer morning for 8 years, but now I notice details that I missed before. The expensive car parked behind the dunes, the designer watch glinting in the sunlight, the confident way he carries himself that speaks of wealth and education rather than seasonal employment. Everything looks different now that I know the truth, and I remember my grandfather's dying words about Marcus's family owning a resort empire, about him being wealthy enough to help us if I was willing to ask, and I realize that I've been living next to my salvation for years without recognizing it, dismissing him as just the lifeguard when he was actually choosing to work at our beach, choosing to stay close to me, choosing to protect me even though I never acknowledged his feelings or appreciated his consistency, and now I have the chance to see him clearly, to understand what he was offering me all along. I throw on a sundress and sandals and run downstairs, my heart pounding with excitement and terror and desperate hope, and I find my grandfather in his study reading the Wall Street Journal with his morning coffee, looking healthy and sharp and completely unaware that in my previous timeline he died of grief after watching his family's empire crumble, and I want to throw my arms around him and tell him how much I love him, how sorry I am for everything I put him through, but instead I sit down across from his desk and say carefully, "Grandfather, I need to ask you about Marcus Rivera, about his family background." My grandfather looks surprised by the question, but sets down his newspaper and studies my face with the shrewd intelligence that built our shipping empire, and he says, "Marcus comes from a very good family. Isabella, very successful in the resort business, although he's chosen a different path for himself, working at our beach every summer instead of joining the family company immediately, and I've always respected that about him, his desire to earn his own way instead of trading on his family's reputation. Why do you ask, sweetheart?" "I think I've been underestimating him," I say honestly, and my grandfather's eyes light up with interest, because he's always hoped I would notice Marcus, always believed that the young man who saved me from riptides and drove me home from late parties and appeared whenever I needed help was exactly the kind of person his granddaughter should marry, someone with good character and genuine feelings who would never hurt me for money or revenge or any other reason. "Marcus Rivera is worth 10 of any other boy you've met," my grandfather says firmly, and I can hear the affection in his voice, the respect he has for Marcus that I was too blind to notice before. His family's resort empire is one of the most successful on the West Coast, but Marcus has chosen to work his way up from the bottom, learning every aspect of the business, And he spends his summers at our beach not because he needs the money, but because… He pauses and smiles at me knowingly. Well, I think you can figure out why a young man would choose to work at the same beach where a certain beautiful girl spends her summers. The truth hits me like a wave, and I realize that everyone knew except me, that my grandfather and probably my parents too understood that Marcus's presence at our beach was about more than just seasonal employment, that his quiet devotion and consistent protection were signs of deep feelings that I dismissed as mere friendliness, and I feel like such a fool for being so blind, for chasing after Dylan's fake passion while ignoring Marcus's real love, for almost destroying my life and my family's legacy because I couldn't see what was right in front of me. Grandfather, I say, my voice shaking with emotion, if someone tried to infiltrate our company, tried to gain access to our accounts and contracts in order to destroy us, how would we stop them? And his expression becomes serious immediately, and I can see him switching from grandfather mode to business mode, the sharp focus that made him successful in a competitive industry. Why are you asking, Isabella? Do you have reason to believe someone is planning to target our family? He says, and I realize that I need to be very careful here, that I can't reveal my knowledge of the future without sounding insane, but I also can't let Dylan get close enough to hurt us again. I've been thinking about the vulnerabilities in our business, I say carefully, about how someone with bad intentions could use a personal relationship to gain access to sensitive information, and I want to make sure we have protections in place. And my grandfather nods approvingly because he's always been proud of my business instincts. Always hoped I would take an active interest in the company that will someday be mine. We spend the next hour discussing security measures and background checks and ways to protect our family assets from potential threats. And my grandfather is so pleased by my interest in the business side of our lives that he doesn't question why I'm suddenly concerned about corporate espionage. And by the time I leave his study, I have a clear plan for protecting my family without revealing that I somehow know Dylan's specific intentions. And I feel stronger and more confident than I have in years, like I'm finally the woman my grandfather raised me to be, instead of the naive girl who almost destroyed everything he built. I walk down to the beach where Marcus is setting up the lifeguard station for the day, arranging the rescue equipment and checking the weather conditions, and for the first time I really look at him, not as the reliable employee who's always been part of the background of my summers, but as the man who loved me enough to spend 8 years watching over me, hoping I would eventually see him clearly, and I notice the way other people defer to him, the expensive equipment he uses, the confidence in his movements that speaks of someone who's used to being in charge, and I wonder how I could have been so blind for so long. I spend the rest of the morning researching Dylan and Sophia with the resources available to the Chen family, calling in favors from my grandfather's business associates and using our company's connections to private investigators, and within hours I have a complete dossier on both of them that confirms everything I remembered from my previous life: their family's bankruptcy, their history of targeting wealthy students, their connection to the investment group that has been slowly acquiring Chen Maritime Holdings stock, and I realize that having foreknowledge of their plan gives me an incredible advantage: the ability to set traps and gather evidence while they still think I'm an easy target. The private investigator my grandfather recommends is discreet and thorough, a former FBI agent who specializes in corporate espionage and fraud cases. And when I show him the evidence of Dylan's pattern of seducing wealthy women and systematically destroying their families' businesses, he immediately understands the scope of the threat and agrees to help me build a case that will put Dylan and Sophia in federal prison before they can hurt anyone else. And I feel a savage satisfaction knowing that this time I'm the hunter instead of the prey, that I have the knowledge and resources to destroy them before they can destroy me. By afternoon, I have security measures in place for all of our family accounts, background check requirements for any new business associates, and monitoring systems that will alert us to any attempts to manipulate our stock price or interfere with our contracts. And my grandfather is so impressed with my suddenly sophisticated understanding of corporate security that he suggests I consider taking a more active role in Chen Maritime Holdings after I graduate, which is exactly what I was hoping for: the chance to protect our family legacy instead of being the weak link that nearly destroyed it. I also begin the delicate process of rebuilding my relationship with Marcus, not rushing into romance but taking the time to get to know him properly, to understand who he really is beneath the humble facade he's maintained for so many years. And our coffee date that evening is a revelation: 2 hours of conversation that shows me his intelligence, his education, his sophisticated understanding of business and economics, and I realized that he's been hiding his light under a bushel, playing down his capabilities so that I wouldn't feel intimidated or think he was trying to compete with my family's success. "I've always admired your family's approach to business," he tells me over dinner at a quiet restaurant overlooking the harbor. "The way your grandfather built something lasting, something that provides good jobs and serves the community, not just maximizes profits," and I can hear the sincerity in his voice, the genuine respect he has for my family's values. And I understand that this is why he's been content to work as a lifeguard instead of immediately joining his family's resort empire, because he wants to earn his success through service and hard work, rather than simply inheriting it. "What about your family's business?" I ask, testing to see how much he'll reveal about his true background, and he hesitates for a moment before saying, "We've been fortunate in the resort industry, built something successful over the years, but I wanted to understand every aspect of the business before taking on leadership responsibilities. Wanted to start at the bottom and work my way up so I'd understand what our employees go through, what our guests really need, and I'm struck by his humility, his commitment to earning his position rather than simply accepting it based on his birth, and I contrast this with Dylan's desperate social climbing and find Marcus's quiet confidence incredibly attractive. We talk about everything that night, our hopes for the future, our fears about living up to our family's expectations, our shared love of the ocean, and the sense of peace that comes from spending time on the water, and I realize that we have so much in common, so many values and interests that I never bothered to discover because I was too busy dismissing him as just the lifeguard. And by the end of the evening, I'm genuinely excited about the possibility of building something real with someone who truly understands me and shares my commitment to family and community. When Dylan tries to call me the next morning, from a different number because I blocked his original one, I'm ready for him. And I answer the phone with sweet curiosity, pretending that I don't know who he is or why he's calling, and when he introduces himself as the charming student I was supposed to meet at Cafe Luna, I play the role of the slightly flighty heiress who forgot about our appointment because something more interesting came up, and I can hear his frustration that his carefully planned seduction is already going off script. "I'm so sorry," I say in my most airheaded voice. "I completely forgot about our coffee date. I've been so busy with family stuff and getting to know this amazing guy who works at our beach. You know how it is when you meet someone really special?" And Dylan's silence on the other end of the line is telling, because his plan depended on me being lonely and vulnerable, desperate for male attention, and now I'm casually mentioning another man, treating our supposed date like an afterthought, completely undermining his strategy of making me feel special and chosen. "Maybe we could reschedule," he says, trying to recover, but I can hear the strain in his voice, the effort it takes to maintain his charming facade when his target isn't behaving as expected. And I realize that Dylan's manipulation only works when his victims are emotionally needy, when they're hungry for the kind of dramatic romance he specializes in providing, and by demonstrating that I have other options, that I'm not sitting around waiting for him to rescue me from loneliness, I'm already disrupting his entire approach. "Oh, that's sweet of you," I say vaguely. "But honestly, I'm pretty busy these days, between family business and spending time with Marcus. But maybe we'll run into each other around campus sometime." And I hang up before he can respond, leaving him confused and off balance, unsure whether I'm genuinely not interested or just playing hard to get, and I know that this uncertainty will eat at him, will make him desperate to regain control of the situation, which means he'll start making mistakes, taking risks that will expose his true intentions. Within days, Sophia approaches me at a campus coffee shop, pretending to be a friendly stranger who recognizes me from social media, and she's clearly been sent by Dylan to assess the situation and find a way to get me back on track with their plan. But I'm ready for her too, and I treat her with the same casual disinterest I showed Dylan, mentioning my new relationship with Marcus and my increased involvement in family business, making it clear that I'm not the isolated, vulnerable target they were expecting to find. "You seem really happy," Sophia says, probing for weaknesses, trying to find an angle she can exploit. "This Marcus guy must be pretty special." And I smile and launch into a detailed description of our wonderful relationship, how mature and successful he is, how my family adores him, how different it is to date someone who has his own resources and doesn't need anything from me except my love, and I watch Sophia's face carefully. seeing her confusion as she realizes that their Mark has somehow transformed from a lonely rich girl into a confident young woman with strong family support and a solid romantic relationship. "I'd love to meet him sometime," Sophia says, still fishing for information, and I agree enthusiastically, suggesting a group beach day where she can meet Marcus and see our family's private beach and witness firsthand the kind of security and support system that surrounds me. And I know that once she reports back to Dylan about Marcus's obvious wealth and competence, about the tight-knit nature of my family, about the impossibility of isolating me from my support system, they'll either give up on me entirely or escalate to more desperate measures, and either way I'll be ready for them. That weekend, I organized the beach gathering, inviting several friends from school, including Sophia, and I make sure that Marcus is there in his full glory, not hiding his intelligence or his obvious quality anymore. And I watch Sophia's face as she takes in the expensive equipment at the Lifeguard station, the way other staff members defer to Marcus, the casual mention of his family's resort empire, and I can see her recalculating, realizing that Marcus isn't just some beach employee but someone with serious resources and connections, someone who could interfere with their plans in ways they hadn't anticipated. The beach day is perfect, with Marcus showing his natural leadership and charm, my friends clearly impressed by his combination of humility and capability, and my parents joining us for lunch, obviously delighted that I'm finally seeing Marcus clearly, and by the end of the day, Sophia has enough information to understand that Dylan's original plan is impossible, that I'm not the isolated target they were counting on, that any attempt to manipulate me will have to contend with Marcus's protection and my family's resources. 2 weeks later, Dylan makes his move with the desperation of someone whose carefully planned revenge is falling apart, and he approaches me directly at the university library with Sophia by his side, both of them looking strained and slightly frantic because their original seduction plan has failed completely and they're running out of time to salvage their mission. And I can see immediately that they've decided to abandon subtlety in favor of more direct manipulation, which means they're about to make the kinds of mistakes that will give me everything I need to destroy them. "Isabella," Dylan says, sliding into the chair across from me with that practiced smile that once made my heart flutter but now just looks calculating and false. "I think we got off on the wrong foot, and I'd really like the chance to explain myself, maybe take you out properly, show you that I'm not just some random guy trying to use you for your family's money." And his words are almost exactly what he said in my previous timeline, the same script he's probably used on dozens of wealthy daughters, but now I can see through the performance to the cold ambition underneath. "That's very kind," I say politely, but as I mentioned, I'm seeing someone, and besides, I'm much too busy with family business these days to have time for new relationships. And I watch his jaw tighten slightly at my casual dismissal, see Sophia's eyes narrow as she realizes that their target is not behaving like the lonely, attention-starved girl they were expecting to manipulate, and I know that my confident rejection is throwing off their entire approach. "Maybe we could just be friends then," Sophia chimes in with fake sweetness. "I feel like we have so much in common, and it would be fun to hang out, maybe do some beach trips together. You know, just girls having fun." And I recognize this as the beginning of their alternative strategy, the plan to get close to me through friendship so they can document my supposed instability and set up scenarios where I'm isolated and vulnerable, but now I'm ready to turn their own tactics against them. "That sounds lovely," I say enthusiastically. "I'd love to show you our family's private beach. Maybe organize a group trip where you can meet Marcus and some of my other friends. Make it a real party." And I see them exchange a quick glance, because a group setting on my family's territory with Marcus present is exactly the opposite of what they need. But they can't refuse without seeming suspicious, so they're forced to agree to my terms even though it puts them at a massive disadvantage. The beach party I organize the following weekend is carefully orchestrated to demonstrate the impossibility of their mission, and I make sure that Marcus is there not as a humble lifeguard but as my obvious romantic interest, someone who clearly has resources and connections of his own, and I invite several friends from school along with some of my parents' business associates' children, creating a crowd that makes it impossible for Dylan and Sophia to isolate me or create any kind of compromising situation. When Dylan and Sophia arrive at our private beach, I can see them taking inventory, noting the expensive facilities, the professional security, the obvious wealth and stability that surrounds my family. And I watch Dylan's expression shift from confident predator to worried opportunist as he realizes that infiltrating this world will be much harder than he anticipated, That I'm not some naive rich girl floating around campus without protection, but the beloved daughter of a powerful family with extensive resources and connections. Wow, Sophia says, trying to maintain her fake friendliness while clearly intimidated by the scope of our wealth. This is amazing. Your family must be really successful. And I launch into a casual description of our shipping empire, mentioning our international contracts and our extensive business partnerships, making it clear that any attack on the Chen family would have serious consequences, that we're not isolated targets, but part of a larger network of wealthy, powerful families who protect each other. Marcus appears at my side like he always has, but now he's not hiding his quality anymore, and when I introduce him to Dylan and Sophia as my boyfriend, I make sure to mention his family's resort empire, his business education, his plans to expand into new markets, and I watch Dylan's face carefully as he realizes that Marcus isn't just some local boy he can easily dismiss, but a serious rival with resources that match or exceed his own, someone who could interfere with any plan to manipulate me. "Nice to meet you," Dylan says to Marcus, but his handshake is too firm, his smile too forced, and I can see him trying to assess whether Marcus represents a threat to his mission or just an obstacle that can be removed. And Marcus, who has spent years watching over me and probably suspects that something is wrong with these new friends, responds with polite coolness, his protective instincts clearly triggered by Dylan's obvious insincerity. The afternoon unfolds exactly as I planned, with Dylan and Sophia becoming increasingly frustrated as they realize that every opportunity for private conversation or isolated interaction is blocked by the group setting, that I'm never alone, never vulnerable, never without Marcus's watchful presence, and by the time they leave, I know they're desperate enough to try something more direct, more dangerous, which means they're about to make the kinds of mistakes that will give the FBI everything they need for criminal charges. That evening, Marcus and I walk along the beach, where he's protected me so many times, and he says quietly, "Isabella, there's something wrong with those friends of yours, especially the guy. He was watching you like a predator, asking too many questions about your family's business, and I don't like the way he looked at you when he thought no one was paying attention." And I realize that Marcus's protective instincts have been triggered not just by jealousy but by genuine concern, that his years of watching over me have given him the ability to recognize real threats. "I know," I tell him honestly. "I've been investigating them, and they're not what they seem. They're part of a group that targets wealthy families. And I think they were planning to use me to get access to our company. But don't worry, I have it handled. The FBI is already building a case against them." And Marcus stops walking and turns to face me with surprise and admiration, clearly impressed that I've been proactive about protecting my family instead of just passively accepting whatever friendship these strangers offered. When Dylan calls me again the next morning, his tone has changed completely, and he's no longer the charming student trying to sweep me off my feet, but someone more calculating, more desperate. And he suggests that we meet to discuss mutual friends and business opportunities, dropping hints that he knows more about my family's company than he should, and I realize that he's moving to his backup plan, probably some kind of blackmail or direct threat, which means I need to accelerate my own timeline and spring the trap before he can do any real damage. "I don't think we have anything to discuss," I tell him firmly, "and I'd appreciate it if you stopped calling me." But Dylan's response confirms my worst fears, because he says quietly, "I think you'll want to hear what I have to say about Chen Maritime Holdings, about some interesting patterns I've noticed in your stock transactions, about some information that might be very embarrassing if it became public." And I know that he's bluffing, that he doesn't actually have any damaging information yet, but he's fishing to see if I'll panic, if I'll agree to meet him out of fear for my family's reputation. "You're welcome to share any concerns about our company with our legal department," I say calmly. "They handle all inquiries about our business practices." And then I hang up and immediately call the FBI agent who's been helping with the investigation because Dylan has just crossed the line from attempted seduction into attempted extortion. And now we have grounds for criminal charges, and I feel a fierce satisfaction knowing that this time Dylan Park is the one who's walking into a trap, the one who's going to lose everything, while I protect my family and build a real future with the man who's always loved me enough to wait for me to see him clearly. The FBI agent, Special Agent Morrison, is excited by Dylan's escalation because it gives them the legal justification they need to move forward with a full investigation And within hours, they have wiretaps in place on Dylan and Sophia's phones, surveillance teams following their movements, and undercover agents monitoring their communications with their larger criminal network. And I'm amazed by how quickly everything moves once Dylan crosses from manipulation into explicit extortion, how his desperation has finally given law enforcement the tools they need to destroy his entire operation. "We want to set up a sting operation," Agent Morrison tells me during our meeting at the FBI field office, "where you agree to meet with Dylan and let him make his demands on tape, giving us the evidence we need not just to arrest him but to take down his entire network of accomplices and financiers." And I agree immediately, because I want to see Dylan's face when he realizes that his perfect victim has become the instrument of his destruction, that his attempt to destroy my family has instead led to his own downfall. The sting operation takes place the following week at a waterfront restaurant in Santa Monica, and I arrive with Marcus. Both of us nervous but determined to help the FBI gather the evidence they need to dismantle Dylan's entire network, and when Dylan shows up looking haggard and desperate, clearly unaware that his apartment has been searched and his communications monitored, I have to resist the urge to smile at how completely he's walked into our trap. "Isabella," Dylan says, sliding into the booth across from Marcus and me, "I'm glad you decided to be reasonable about this. I really didn't want to hurt your family. But you have to understand that certain information has come to light, information that could be very embarrassing if it became public, and I'm hoping we can work out some kind of arrangement that benefits everyone involved." And I can hear the wire concealed in my jewelry picking up every word, transmitting his confession to the FBI agents stationed around the restaurant. "What kind of arrangement?" I ask innocently, playing the role of the frightened heiress who's been intimidated into cooperation, and Dylan's eyes light up with greedy satisfaction as he thinks he's finally gotten me under his control, finally found the leverage he needs to destroy my family and claim his revenge against my grandfather's company. "Nothing too complicated," Dylan says, pulling out a tablet computer and showing me documents that purport to be evidence of financial impropriety at Chen Maritime Holdings. Fake records that have been carefully constructed to look damaging but would never hold up under professional scrutiny. These documents show some interesting patterns in your family's business dealings. Some transactions that might attract unwanted government attention, and I think it would be better for everyone if these never became public, don't you agree? Marcus's hand finds mine under the table, steady and reassuring, and I can see Dylan's jaw tighten as he realizes that my boyfriend isn't intimidated by his threats, that Marcus's presence represents the kind of support system that makes extortion victims harder to isolate and control, and I know that Dylan is about to make another mistake, about to reveal more about his operation and his frustration at not being able to separate me from my allies. "Of course, I'd need something in return for my discretion," Dylan continues. "Maybe a consulting position with your family's company, access to some business accounts, the kind of insider information that would help me make some profitable investments, and in exchange I'd make sure these documents disappear forever, along with any other problematic information that might surface in the future." And there it is, the explicit quid pro quo that transforms his veiled threats into prosecutable extortion. And I can imagine the FBI agents recording every word, building an airtight case against Dylan and his conspirators. "How do I know you won't just ask for more later?" I say, still playing the frightened victim. "How do I know this won't just be the beginning of endless demands?" And Dylan leans forward with predatory confidence, thinking he's finally broken me down, finally convinced me that cooperation is my only option. "Because I'm not greedy," Dylan lies smoothly. "I just want what my family deserves, what was taken from us when your grandfather destroyed our business, and once I have enough to rebuild what we lost, I'll disappear from your life forever. You'll never have to worry about me again." And his admission of revenge motivation is exactly what the FBI needed to tie his current crimes to his family's historical grievances, proving that this isn't just random extortion, but part of a calculated campaign of retribution. The meeting continues for another 20 minutes, with Dylan becoming increasingly detailed about his demands and his threats, apparently convinced that he's finally found the perfect victim, someone wealthy enough to pay him handsomely but frightened enough to comply with his extortion. And by the time he leaves the restaurant, he's given the FBI everything they need to arrest him and his entire network for conspiracy, fraud, extortion, and racketeering. That evening, as Marcus and I sit on our family's private beach watching the sunset, federal agents are simultaneously raiding locations across 3 states, arresting Dylan and Sophia and 12 other conspirators, seizing financial records and computer files that will send them all to federal prison for decades. And I think about how different this feels from my previous timeline, how choosing the right man and trusting my family's wisdom has transformed a story of destruction into a story of justice. And when Marcus takes my hand and tells me he's proud of my courage, I know that I've finally become the woman my grandfather raised me to be, someone who protects the people she loves instead of endangering them. 6 months later, the federal trial of David Carlson, whose real name turns out to be Dylan Park, and his criminal conspiracy becomes the biggest financial crime story of the year, and I watch from the courthouse gallery as prosecutors present evidence of their decade-long campaign of revenge fraud, their systematic targeting of wealthy families, their careful manipulation of vulnerable young people who were desperate for love and acceptance. And I think about how close I came to being their most successful victim, how my family's entire legacy almost disappeared because I was too blind to see through their lies. The courtroom is packed with victims and their families, dozens of people whose lives were shattered by Dylan and Sophia's schemes, and as each family tells their story of betrayal and financial ruin, of children who trusted the wrong people, and parents who lost everything trying to save companies that were being destroyed from within, I realize how lucky I was to have a second chance. How many other families never got the opportunity to protect themselves from these predators? Dylan sits at the defendant's table looking nothing like the charming student who tried to seduce me, his expensive suits and confident smile replaced by a prison jumpsuit and the hollow-eyed stare of someone whose carefully constructed fantasy has collapsed completely. And when he's forced to listen to victim impact statements describing the pain and devastation his schemes caused, I can see him trying to maintain his sense of righteous grievance, still convinced that his actions were justified by his family's ancient bankruptcy, still unable to accept responsibility for the choices that led him here. Sophia testifies against her brother in exchange for a reduced sentence, detailing how they researched their targets, how they practiced their manipulation techniques, how they coordinated with other criminal organizations to maximize the damage they could inflict, and her testimony reveals the full scope of their operation, the careful planning and cold calculation that went into destroying so many innocent families. And I feel sick thinking about how close I came to being just another case study in their manual of psychological warfare. When it's my turn to testify, I take the stand wearing a simple blue dress that my grandfather chose, and I look directly at Dylan as I describe his attempts to manipulate me, his careful construction of a fake persona designed to exploit my vulnerabilities, his systematic efforts to isolate me from my family and gain access to our business operations, and I watch his face as he realizes that his perfect victim saw through his lies, that his decade-long revenge fantasy has ended in complete failure. The defendant researched my family for months before approaching me. I tell the jury, my voice steady and clear, he learned about my interests, my insecurities, my desire to be loved for myself rather than my family's money, and he crafted an entire false personality around what would appeal to me most: the struggling student who insisted on paying for our dates, the ambitious young man who wanted to prove himself worthy of my family's respect, all of it calculated to make me trust him enough to give him the access he needed to destroy us. The jury deliberates for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts, and when the judge sentences Dylan to 25 years in federal prison, I feel a sense of justice that extends far beyond my own experience, knowing that this predator will never again be able to destroy innocent families, that his network of revenge-motivated criminals has been dismantled, that other wealthy young people will be safer because we had the courage to fight back instead of submitting to extortion. Outside the courthouse, Marcus and I are surrounded by reporters asking about our plans for the future, and I announce that we're launching a foundation to help fraud victims rebuild their lives and to educate young people about the warning signs of financial predators, turning our experience into something positive that can protect other families from similar attacks. And I see my grandfather in the crowd beaming with pride that his granddaughter has learned to transform pain into purpose, victimization, into victory. That evening, as we celebrate with my family at our favorite restaurant, toasting the end of Dylan's reign of terror and the beginning of our new lives, Marcus stands up and taps his glass, and, with his voice shaking slightly with emotion, He says, "Isabella, you've shown me what real courage looks like, what it means to protect the people you love even when it's dangerous. And I can't imagine spending my life with anyone else." And then he's down on one knee with a ring made from sea glass collected from our beach. And I'm crying and laughing and saying yes as my parents cheer and my grandfather wipes tears from his eyes. And I think about how this moment is everything my previous timeline wasn't. Real love instead of manipulation, family support instead of isolation, a future built on truth instead of lies. 2 years later, I'm standing on the deck of the luxury yacht that Marcus and I bought together, watching the sunset paint the Pacific Ocean in shades of gold and crimson, and I'm 6 months pregnant with our first child, a daughter we've decided to name Grace after my grandmother, and as I feel her moving inside me, I think about how different this timeline is from the one where I died in these same waters, murdered by people I thought loved me, and I'm overwhelmed with gratitude for the second chance that saved not just my life but my entire family's legacy. Our wedding was perfect in its simplicity, a small ceremony on our family's private beach with just our closest friends and relatives, and instead of the elaborate designer gown that Dylan would have insisted on, I wore my grandmother's pearls and a simple white dress that moved beautifully in the ocean breeze. And when Marcus and I exchanged vows that we wrote ourselves, promising to protect each other and support each other's dreams and build something lasting together, I felt like I was finally living the life I was meant to have, free from the manipulation and lies that almost destroyed me. Chen Maritime Holdings and Rivera Resort Empire merged 6 months after our wedding, creating a sustainable coastal development company that honors both our families' legacies while building something new and innovative. And I've discovered that I love the business side of our operations, the strategic planning and problem-solving that my grandfather taught me. And Marcus and I work together as true partners, each bringing our own strengths to the challenges we face, and I finally understand what healthy love looks like, how two strong people can support each other without losing their individual identities. My grandfather lived to see our daughter's birth, and he spent his final months teaching her to recognize the different seabirds that visit our beach, singing her the same lullabies he once sang to me, and when he passed away peacefully in his sleep at age 88, I knew that he was satisfied with the legacy he was leaving, that his granddaughter had learned to protect the family empire instead of endangering it, that the Chen family name would continue with honor and integrity for generations to come. Marcus still swims every morning, though he's traded his lifeguard duties for CEO responsibilities, and sometimes I join him in the calm waters near our house, floating on my back with my pregnant belly rising above the surface like a small island. And I think about how water was once a symbol of danger in my life, the element that almost killed me, but now it represents peace and renewal, the place where Marcus first saved me and continues to save me every day with his quiet, consistent love. As the sun sets completely and the first stars appear in the darkening sky, Marcus and I go inside to prepare dinner, moving around our kitchen with the comfortable efficiency of a couple who have learned to work together. And I think about the child growing inside me, about the values we'll teach her, about the importance of choosing trust over suspicion, loyalty over excitement, substance over style, and I'm determined to raise a daughter who will never be foolish enough to mistake manipulation for love, who will recognize her own worth and demand to be treated with respect. Later that night, as we lie in bed with Marcus's hand resting on my belly, feeling our daughter's movements and planning her nursery and discussing the kind of parents we want to be, I think about my previous timeline, about the Isabella who died in the Pacific Ocean, believing that she had destroyed everything she touched, and I send her a silent message of love and forgiveness, telling her that her suffering wasn't meaningless, that her death somehow gave me the knowledge I needed to save us all, and I promise her that I'll live the life she never got to have, that I'll love the man she never got to choose, that I'll protect the family she accidentally endangered. In the morning, I'll wake up in Marcus's arms and feel our daughter moving inside me, and I'll know with absolute certainty that I'm living the life I was always meant to have, surrounded by real love instead of fake passion, protected by genuine loyalty instead of manipulative promises, building something lasting with a partner who sees me clearly and loves me completely. And I learned that real love doesn't abandon you in deep water, but teaches you to swim stronger and stays close enough to catch you if you fall. And as I watch Marcus sleep peacefully beside me, his face relaxed and trusting, I know that being stranded led me exactly where I needed to be. The end.